This sub-series of tutorials is going to be about lighting. We're basically going to be going over everything on this ShaderLab page called color material lighting. And the type of lighting that's used in the fixed function pipeline is known as blend-phong, here's a Wikipedia page, which is a faster variant of Phong shading. Phong shading has three components: ambient, diffuse, and specular, which are added together to get a combined lighting model. And we are also going to have an emission component, which we'll get into first. So one thing we should know about the lighting in the fixed function pipeline is that it is vertex lighting. It is not computed per pixel, as is suggested on the Phong shading page, which would look like that. Instead, it's going to be computed per vertex and then interpolated across the vertices. This is the same thing you could do if you were going to paint vertex colors or otherwise assign vertex colors in your 3D modeling app. And if you were going to have a static object, you could always just paint or bake the vertex colors. You wouldn't need to worry about having the computer do that for you. This lighting is only worth doing generally if you're going to have moving objects or animated objects, things that are not static like that. But yeah, you can use a light map in vertex colors if you want to, and you will save yourself a texture that way. So let's get into the first color component. That's emission. So emission is not, you might think from the name that it has some sort of radiosity, that is, the color would be emitted from the object, it would shine onto other objects. That's not how it works. It's much simpler than that. It just is a color that works regardless of lighting, whether it's in the dark or being hit by a light. The color component is always there. So let's define this emission color. We'll do that in the properties block, and we'll just give it a variable name of emission in the shader, and we'll call it emission in the inspector, and that's a color type. So what we will need to do first is say lighting on, because we are going to be using lighting. The default is lighting off. And then we'll have a material block. We'll get into everything else later, but for right now, we're just going to be using emission. So you need the word emission, and then your variable, or you can make your own constant here, but might as well use a variable we can assign in the inspector. So we'll call that emission in these square braces. And that's all you need to do, is make sure lighting is on, and then you have a material block. And then when we save this and go back to the inspector, we will be able to assign a color from by clicking, in the variable color variable, and it's updating automatically because I am using the Unity color picker. It wouldn't do that if you were using the OS X one. So it's pretty much as simple as that. Just a solid color for all vertices of the mesh, although it is vertex coloring and it's being interpolated because all the colors are the same. It looks like we're having per pixel coloring. It's like a per pixel shader. It's not actually happening, but because it's solid, you don't see any difference. So we can also say, let's go ahead and do a set texture. So we'll do set texture, and then it doesn't matter what we're using right now because we're not going to actually be using it, but we need the texture stage. So we'll combine primary, and in this case, the colors are not coming from a solid color or from vertex colors that you've painted, but rather from the material block. That's where the that's coloring the vertices. So we'll combine that primary times the alpha of the primary. So save that, and now we'll go into this variable and we'll change the alpha. So it should be getting darker, but it's not. So that's something you need to know, that the colors that you define here in the material block, the alpha component is useless. It doesn't it just stays at 1, so you're not actually defining anything there. So if you were instead going to turn lighting back off, comment that out, and define color with the same property name, emission, and then go back into the inspector and assign colors. We'll keep it the same color there and just change the alpha value. Now we are getting a change. So actually emission is not as powerful as using a color block. So if all you're going to be, or color statement, if all you're going to be using is emission, Don't bother with writing lighting on material emission. I don't actually know if it's slower or faster in the hardware. It's just extra clutter and it's not as powerful.